Today we're going to explore the makings of a good partnership from many different perspectives, from the perspectives of both for-profit and nonprofit. We're going to talk about getting started. What does your company or organization look for when considering a partnership? We'll talk about meeting and matching, making the right match, how to know when you have the right partner, and then what to do after you've closed. How does a partnership continue to work and work through and work out of any difficulties that it may encounter? I'm Joy Horrock Brown. I'm the CEO of New Hope Housing in Houston, Texas. We're the leading provider of supportive housing in the state, with almost 1,000 units of housing that serve many who've been formerly homeless, who have had addiction difficulties, who are veterans, who are elderly, or who simply have an extremely low-income job. And we work always with public-private partnerships with the city, with the state, and with the Housing Authority in Houston. We have 2 projects under development now. One of them is mixed use with retail on the first floor in the light rail, on the light rail in the east end of downtown Houston called Edo, and 7,500 square feet of commercial office space up top, and 175 single-room occupancy units, a shared living environment with efficiency apartments. And we're about to break ground on our first family deal, 187 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments for homeless and at-risk families in an enormously service-rich environment. So welcome and thank you for being here. And let me talk to you for a moment or two about some of the panelists who are sharing the stage and who are going to provide really an interactive conversation. We're not heavy on PowerPoints today. We're not long on our own words. We're long on wanting you to participate and ask questions as we go through this. And Benny, I bet I can count on you to ask a question, okay? So with me today is Jorge Aguirre, and Jorge is the Vice President of Development at Michaels Development Company, and he focuses on affordable multifamily developments throughout the Southeast with primary focus in Georgia and Florida. He's participated in the development of over 2,000 units in 7 states, and he has a particular expertise in the redevelopment of public housing. Also with us is Jim Shaw, who's the Executive Director of Capital Area Housing Finance Corporation, and they have this acronym CAHFC that I'm not even going to attempt to put into words. He is the Executive Director of CAHFC, as well as President of its 14 subsidiary entities. It's a 9-county regional bond issuer in Central Texas, and he has been involved in over $950 million in tax-exempt and taxable bonds to provide assistance to more than 4,000 first-time homebuyers and construct or rehabilitate over 4,000 rental units. You're in really good hands here today, also with Ron Kowal, who's the Vice President of Housing Development and Asset Management for Austin Affordable Housing Corporation, which is a subsidiary of the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. Edwina Carrington is here, and I believe Edwina is on the board of the Housing Authority of the City of Austin for a couple of years now, Edwina? Yes. Ron works with a portfolio of 2,000 affordable multifamily and residential units, 150,000 square feet of office space, and almost 89,000 square feet of retail space. Also with us today is Aaron Weisner. Aaron is Vice President for Enterprise Community Investment, and he manages key developer relationships, and listen to this list: Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Oklahoma, and Texas. That's 22 states, if I was counting correctly. The Dakotas are north and south, 22 states. And he has managed the investment of more than $350 $50 million in credits, both low-income and historic tax credits, in 25 developments. So don't sit back, sit forward and participate and work together with us as we talk about what makes a good partnership, something that's very timely for us at New Hope Housing, and I trust it is for you as well. So as we get started here, let's talk first about getting started and hear from the panelists what they look for when they're considering a partnership or a joint venture, and speaking from their unique perspective, because we have a broad range of expertise here. Talk about what you look for, what's the one challenge that makes partnering the most critical for you. Give us an example of what you've done that's been successful.
Good afternoon. It is on. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Happy to be back in Texas. And thank you to Joy. She made me sound very impressive. One of the things that we look for in a partnership is, can the partnership help us get 9% credits? As a private developer, the 9% credit is the name of the game. So in a lot of states, it's a strategic move, and we focus on partnerships if it's going to advance our scoring, basically, and make it easier for us to get credits. Obviously, we see a lot of RFQs where there may be federal grant money that makes bond transactions happen easier if the partner has access to the soft money. So from a very basic sort of evaluation for us is, can our partner help us to get to another closing, by us responding to the RFQ and hopefully earning it. In terms of, I guess you want me to kind of just walk through that whole topic, or I guess you all can jump in as I talk as well, of course. One of the challenges that we see in some of our partnerships is, does our partner know what they want? And for example, an example of something that maybe didn't work out, which is relevant, right? I mean, it's not all good experiences always, but we just ended a relationship in Florida where we were partnering with a housing authority, but the city was relying on the housing authority to do a lot of community development for a whole neighborhood. And it was because, well, they hired a developer. But that wasn't our role. That's not our role. We don't, as a company, we don't do community development. We don't do grant writing. We can help them set up a CRA. And that was never the intent, but all of a sudden that became the expectation. And we weren't giving them what they needed, and it's something that if we'd known that up front, we probably would have not sought out that relationship. From our perspective, the city and the housing authority had a lot of legwork to do to get to where they needed to go before we could be of any use to them. So that's something that, as we've done tons of these, we always look at. Does the public partner, are they ready to really execute on a development or on a redevelopment plan? That's something that's becoming very to the front of the conversation internally before we decide to respond to RFQs. When our partner knows what they want, it's amazing. We executed on a 3-phase Hope 6 development in Daytona Beach in less than 24 months for 3 tax credit closings. And it was a function of our housing authority we came in as a replacement developer, and our housing authority partner and our city partner were all about, we want to execute. We've been going after this grant for 4 years, and we've got a good team behind us now, and we want to move forward. So when you align with your partner, it can be extremely, extremely, extremely beneficial to all parties involved.
And so we're interested in hearing from the other panelists, and I don't think we necessarily need to go in order. We can sort of do it the Quaker method. When you feel moved to speak, you can take the floor.
If I might add just a little bit what Jorge was saying, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is what we decided 12, 13 years ago when we started looking at partnerships, and that was let us go figure out what our expectations are, what we bring to the table, and how we put together a good business deal. The thing that I'm afraid some people tend to forget is these are real estate transactions. So we've got to put together a real estate deal that makes sense today, tomorrow, 15, 20 years down the road, and has to make sense for us and our partner. So one of the questions that I tend to ask our partners is, are you making enough money on the deal? Part of the reason for that is I want him to be just as interested in our deal 15 years from now as he is at the closing table. So years ago, Capital Areas tried, and I must confess, I'm a recovering developer. I came into this my current job, being a private developer for many, many years, and got tired of signing personal guarantees. But years ago, I wrote this. I've actually brought the cover page of this, so if any of you want it. But this is on our website, and I wrote this back in 2006. And the idea here was about 10 pages. The idea was to sit down, really aimed for other housing finance corporations, but also for developers. And the idea there was to make sure these housing finance corporations, or PHAs, had a clear understanding of their role, what their expectations are, what the developers' expectations are, what the challenges would be in the partnership, and how you address those on the front end to try to remove as much uncertainty from the process as you can on the front end. So I would encourage you to go to our website and look at this. It's proven very helpful to a lot of people. The other thing we did very early on, at the very beginning, was to say, let's go put together a memorandum of understanding so that everybody involved in the transaction starts with that MOU, and we kind of know what the business deal is going to look like. Obviously, that gets negotiated as you go forward, but it lays out the basic business deal framework on the front end. And we've been fortunate that we haven't had any situations develop like Jorge just described, where we've gone in these deals and everybody knows what the expectation are. And I kind of kid our developer partners, I'm going to watch how you treat me while we're dating, so I'll know what it's going to be like when we're married, because these are long-term relationships. It's not what I used to do, build it and flip it in 5 years. This is a deal that we're in for a long time. We have to look at what do we bring to the table that's of real value. And in Texas, a big part of that, of course, is the property tax exemption, sales tax exemptions. And that definitely helps a bond deal work. And we also have access, as Jorge said, to soft money. So all of that gets rolled into the deal very early on, and we try to eliminate any surprises down the road. There are going to be enough surprises in any real estate deal. We just try to manage that to the extent we can.
So Jim, I'm not only going to go to your website, could I have a copy of that right now? I think this is something we're all going to find. No, I think this is something we're all going to. Well, that would be great.
Rather than kill a lot of trees, I just brought the cover page that would give you the link, so that we're a young, tech-savvy company. So rather than kill more trees, I'm a millennial times 2.
So I'll just have my cover page right now.
Have you raised your rate on that? Every hit is $1.99 or something like that?
Yeah, kind of like YouTube. We're making money on it.
Well, when you go to
we did this. I actually did it on a consulting job years ago, and then just decided, and we were doing half-day workshops with Novogradac and stuff, and getting this out in front of everybody. And we finally decided just put it on the website and let everybody have access to it, because everybody was giving me really positive feedback.
Well, Jim, when you go to www.newhopehousing.com, you have an immediate ability to donate. So just as a suggestion here.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be our source of soft money.
There you go. Crowdfunding.
Well, I got to piggyback on this because I guess this is my 4th year of sitting on this panel, and so from a housing authority perspective, it's a little different. Despite me wanting to say I'm this brilliant guy, development's a unique tool, and we don't. That's not our core mission. It never is as a housing authority. We strive to provide safe and decent housing to our to our public housing residents that we serve. We administer a voucher program. That's our main goal. Development, is important to housing authorities in many ways, but 3 years ago at this panel, it was 1 week after I closed our first development deal with our partner. And to back up with that, when it was presented to me some months prior to that, the first person I called was Jim. And I went over to Jim's office and sat down, and he handed me that thing right there and said, He did not charge me, and he said, before you leave, I want you to read that document. And I sat there in his conference room and read that document, and I think it's very valuable, very helpful. So, but I'll never forget that. So it's kind of an anniversary for me here of our first public-private partnership that the Housing Authority of Austin's ever done. But there's a lot of basics that we talk about from a housing authority's perspective, and it's kind of, some of them's kind of obvious. I mean, we want to make sure that the developer we partner with has a good reputation, has had no previous problems with TDHCA or with any other with any other entities, has always been in compliance, has experience, a good track record. Austin is very unique. Every city has their own unique challenges when it comes to permitting and getting things done through the city and dealing with council and things like that. And Austin has its own unique problems as well. So that's important to us, that they have some experience from that standpoint. Who their contractors, subcontractors are going to be, what kind of relationships do they have with, do they have the ability to get the job done? I mean, we've been on job sites where, you're showing me the framer up there, and then 30 seconds later, they're all getting in a truck going to the next job site across the street because they just got paid $5 more an hour. So, what, do you, are we going to, do you have control over your subs, your contractors? But more importantly, I think what we've kind of evolved into is, and I think Jorge alluded to this a little bit, is, do you really understand what we are and what a housing authority is? I mean, I can't tell you conversations that I've had where I felt that I was being, I was approached to do a deal, and by the way, we want your exemption, we want your sales exemption, and we're going to give you this, and then we would just really want you to just go away. I mean, and so I'm not in the business to make, I'm very happy for everybody to make money. And one of the tools that the Housing Authority has done with private-public partnerships is it is a revenue source. It's a revenue generator for us to help us sustain our operations, with, because we get cuts and things like that. But it's critical to us that a developer understands our mission and asks the question, what are your goals? What are your objectives? What is your long-term plan for this property? What do you want to see done? How do you want to be involved in this? How can we incorporate you and make you part of this deal? And it's a lot of hand-holding. I mean, there's a lot of housing authorities out there that really don't understand development. I mean, you guys know that. It's a very complicated thing. Problems arise, things come up, and understanding the goals and objectives of our board, and to make sure that, I think you alluded to it, that we continue and we're able to carry through what you want us to do on your end. So communication and the ability to make us a true partner is very important to us, and I think we get that impression right off the first meeting when we first meet someone. I can tell pretty quickly where they think our role is going to be. So I pay very close attention to that. More so, I put more weight into that above all the revenue and all the profit sharing and the properties. And then they got to understand that our #1 mission is to provide and put more affordable housing on the ground, especially in cities like Austin where it's just in such high demand. So that's kind of what we do in the first initial meeting, what we look at.
No, that's a perfect way of looking at this. I mean, we've seen in our enterprise, our owner is a nonprofit organization, Enterprise Community Partners, national capacity building, policy-oriented organization, and works with a lot of nonprofit, for-profit, mission-driven organizations, developer organizations around the country. And we oftentimes get brought in early doing capacity building, pre-development, training, support, and at that point, there are times where these relationships are built, and these relationships can range anywhere from perfect match to forced marriage. And in certain situations, that basic conversation that seems to make so much sense, elemental in terms of doing business together, doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. It's focused on, hey, this makes sense. 1 + 1 = 2. We should work together and get this deal done. And especially since the last recession, when a lot of groups were coming together because one group didn't potentially have the balance sheet to back their guarantees. They needed a partner to come in to do the deal with them to sign guarantees. And some situations in Texas where you have the property tax exemption, or if there's other reasons for it, groups can get pushed together sometimes unnaturally. And that conversation of really understanding each other, and it goes beyond just approach. I think the first thing I ask when reviewing a joint venture, beyond what goes into the memorandum of understanding in the end, is chart this out for me. Who's doing what? There's ultimately a bunch of skill sets that need to be brought together, and starts with somebody's bringing in the land, somebody's bringing in the public benefits, somebody's bringing in the capacity to do the tax credit application, somebody's bringing in the know-how of how to close a deal, somebody may have more long-term capacity for managing the property, what have you. But sometimes things where that role delineation hasn't been made clear. There's two groups that both do the same thing well and the other thing not very well, and they're expecting the other group to do it, and when it comes down to it, that hasn't worked out. And so sometimes you can sit down for 20 minutes with the two partners and have them talk about the relationship and understand quickly. Actually, you'd ask for some cases. One I'll give. I wasn't going to pick on Ron, but it actually works out pretty well given what he just said. Turned out we worked with Ron on a project here in Austin a couple of years ago, and happened to know Ron and his partner on that project, both through totally separate things. Ron, we had met through RAD trainings, and this other developer we had actually gotten to know in Louisiana. And when we first started talking to him, it actually made a lot of sense on paper, but it was really when we got together with Ron and the development team here and talked it through, and it was clear everything had really been thought through. There had been some again basic role delineation, clarifying that oftentimes doesn't happen until sometimes you're a couple weeks away from closing, and then you realize, oh wait, this hasn't been worked out yet, and that's not the right time for those discussions to happen. So.
Yeah, if I could add, Ron touched on a couple of really important points, and I've kind of lost track of how many panels I've been on now talking about partnerships, for 10, 11, 12 years. But the thing I can tell you is I've seen the MO change. I can remember back when we first started talking to developer partners about deals. For some reason, the deal was the developer came in, wanted that tax exemption, and always pat me on the back and say, well, you don't need to worry your pretty little head about the details. We'll take care of everything. You just get us that exemption, and I think we can get you $10,000 a year out of the deal. To which I would reply, whatever will I do with all that money? I wanted to pay my accounting expenses on the deal. But that was kind of where people were coming from. So my kind of standard flippant response was, well, if you're looking for somebody you can give 10 grand to and a pat on the back, I'm probably not the guy you want to talk to. But when people talk about the mission, we're like Ron. I mean, we are a public instrumentality, but I try to remind people my first mission is to not manage my company into bankruptcy. Once I do that, then we'll talk about the other mission, but we have to be able to survive in the deal. So that's kind of this give and take and finding a relationship and a business deal that makes sense for everybody across the board. But I will say that the $10,000 and a pat on the back deals have kind of gone away, over the last several years. Everybody, I think, in the industry now has developed a kind of a clearer understanding. And in Texas, there's kind of a framework that we work within and within reason. So I'm glad to see those days gone. Then they would go down the street, try to find somebody else that would do it for $10,000. And I always call that the greater idiot theory. Let's just go find somebody who's agreeing to $10,000. But I think this whole relationship has matured between the development community and groups like Ron and mine.
It definitely has evolved. When Michael started doing public-private partnerships, 20 years ago in the Hub 6 model, even though they were public housing partnerships like that, that was the model. Like we got the ground under lease, we owned the building. They basically had money for us for soft funds to buy down the ACC units at closing. And that's what the housing authorities did. And really right now it's, and for a minimal share of the fee. Right now the housing authorities, just the industry has matured, and our housing finance corporations, our housing authority partners, they can facilitate the closing. They take on certain roles and responsibilities in terms of assisting to get approvals, whether it's with HUD, whether it's with the local government. There should be a fee sharing agreement. It's something else that Ron touched on that I think is important is, if you're a private developer looking for a public-private partnership, you do have to understand how your partner operates. As Ron said, he answers to a board. He doesn't always have the ability, unlike your principal, to just come into the office and sign a piece of paper because you're trying to close tomorrow. Some things need board resolutions. What needs a board resolution? How far in advance do you need to be planning for that kind of stuff? If it's your first time trying to do a partnership with an instrumentality of a public government or a government agency, those are things that we sometimes don't think about. The other one that I always like to remind people of is, no matter who ultimately owns and controls the partnership, your public agency will always be the face of the development locally, whether that is to their city council, whether that is to their constituency, to their resident base, to whomever it may be. So it's good to have conversations up front, lay out who's in charge of what, who's doing what, how are you going to go through that process so that there's no surprises. Like Jim said, there will be tons of surprises. Perfect example, we approved some change orders recently. Our housing authority partner, nowhere did they ever mention that they wanted to review change orders, but they're not happy that we approve change orders without their approval. It's their first time going through the process. Things like that are gonna be missed. So the more you can think through the process and talk through the process with your partner up front, the easier it's going to be for everyone. And for the partners, for the potential public partners, again piggybacking on something that Ron and Jim said, know who the management company is going to be, and know how important it is for you to have a say in how that property looks or is getting operated 8-10 years down the road. These transactions don't always kick out cash all the time. And again, who manages the property? You're not thinking about that when you're rushing to get to the closing table, but you're going to live with this property for 15 or 20 years. Who's going to be managing it in 12 years? Does your developer have the wherewithal to be there in 12 years, to stand behind the property with you 12 years down the road? But again, who's running that day to day? That is something that we don't always think about up front.
And so we have some people here in the audience that I know participate in partnerships. I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Don't leave me hanging out here all by myself here. I know Tim Cantwell, Clark Colvin, Benny Rodriguez have all done partnerships. Could someone kind of help us a little bit and let us know what you look for, what's important to you, what you think the pitfalls are? Yeah.
I can start, we're on our second partnership project. I work for HUD before, like I took on the road as a for nonprofit that I work with. And one of the things that we always look for, and that I started the conversation with developers was that reward the same as risk. So if you're asking us to take more of the risk, then we should show the risk. So that's pretty much been except for everything y'all said, that's what we've always added. The more risk that we're taking on, the more work we're taking, and the greater the risk of profit sharing. That's what we
That's a good point. I mean, just real quickly, as a housing authority, a lot of the guarantees, a lot of the pre-development upfront costs, a lot of the design, engineering, permitting, all of that is pretty much handled by the developer and with actually working with us closely. But the bottom line is they're spending that money up front, and so housing authorities, I think, have grown and know our role in that, in that we understand that again, you take the risk of putting up your dollars to do these things. Then when we were talking about developer fee splits and things like that it's only right that plays in the hands better for a developer, and we're okay with that, because again, it's a balance of risk and reward. We typically don't like to take on construction guarantees. We don't want to take on operating deficit guarantees. We kind of immune ourselves from that until after the fact, until those operating deficit guarantees burn off. So anyway, the risk and reward is just that. I mean, the more risk the developer takes, I think the more reward they get, and I think housing authorities are pretty cool with that.
And I think there's been some standardization around the more partnership models become popular and necessary in nationally, but particularly in the state of Texas. It used to be, looking at these like 10 years ago, and it was, it was being sort of renegotiated every single time. And, right, you guys probably experienced this because you've been doing these for as long as anybody, where each time you sort of had to reinvent the wheel a little bit, negotiating how this was shared. And at this point now, I mean, how many people do you get responding to an RFP when you put one out now? Probably, as many as you send out. Yeah. And less needs to be negotiated. I mean, I don't know if this has been your experience, but as opposed to, there's a collegial network of nonprofits, housing authorities, everything you should always sort of reach to and say, just out of curiosity, what were your economics on this deal, and more information that can be shared on that kind of thing, where it used to be kind of a black box each time one of these deals was negotiated. And we're seeing now, a little more standardization once we actually see those MOUs come to us, as opposed to, it could be, sometimes the risk really didn't necessarily follow the, where the fee and the other benefits were going.
And so, Tim, I saw that you had something to add a few minutes ago. Tim Cantwell.
Well, I don't know if I have anything to add, but I can throw in. I'm a principal in Camp Anderson, and we have a line of permanent supportive and service-enriched housing developments that we've done on the next phase. Based out of Los Angeles, we're in the Houston marketplace here, and we actually started a actual joint venture between a startup nonprofit, which you may have heard of if you're in the space at all, called the United States Veterans Initiative, known as USVETS. We actually started that out of a line item in our development budget in 1993 to get a service partner for the homeless veterans that we were going to be housing in the building. And it worked superbly well, and we basically leveraged our balance sheet to front load the startup costs for the nonprofits until they could get to the spot where they could get grants and become self-serving or self-financing. And that worked exceedingly well. And in fact, it worked so well that we decided to take it apart and blow up the joint venture about 4 years ago, and have changed that structure. And I don't know that that's been good or bad for either party. But what I'll say worked exceedingly well is we had a crystal clear, strong vision of what we were going to do and who was going to do what. And I heard you all say that. So the developer's goal in that, the mission was around trying to get the most homeless veterans housed as quickly as possible and to their highest level of individual independence. And that's the whole vision, and that hasn't changed. But the developer's responsibility was to site, to locate, to acquire, to design, to build, to finance, install, and manage the physical asset. And the nonprofit United States Veterans Initiative was to design, finance, manage, reevaluate, restructure the program activities. And that was the division of labor, and it worked exceedingly well. And to this day, we're I'm reviewing leases right now, sitting back here on my cheat sheet, as we renegotiate those things. And we see a shift and a real struggle around recognition of risk and reward. You're talking about being a housing authority, and as a developer, your ability to do whatever you say you're going to do and us be able to rely on that is entirely different than us having that same conversation with the private nonprofit that has, Joy excluded, of course, as an exception. But typically, we have no assurance that they can meet their obligations whatsoever. So having them participate in a guarantee would be silly, even if they were willing to. So we even worry about that on the program side of the services because they're dependent on being able to refund their programs out of the services. So I'd be curious to know what the standardization is ferreting out to now. I'd be really interested to hear that. But yeah, that's all I have. Clear, strong vision and trying to come around to an understanding of the risk and reward in cutting up the development.
So the standardization, could you speak to that a little bit, Jim? I thought it was an interesting comment.
Yeah, well, I think Aaron's right. I mean, what I've seen, and you're absolutely right, back in the early days, nobody quite knew what this should look like. And the difficulty was in evaluating this risk and reward. What's the value of that? Our situation has been a little bit different, I think, from perhaps some other nonprofits. I still kind of chafe when people talk about us being a nonprofit. Because of our development background and expertise, I think our developer partners have really looked at us and said, yeah, we want you guys involved in design and everything because, and Joy said, we're kind of the public face. And Jorge made that comment. And that's one of the big values here is every developer is suspect. When you go to the local government, particularly if you're from out of town, so.
We can be a shady bunch. It's all a bad reputation, but we got to live with it.
My point is, we have worked hard over the last 35 years to build a really strong reputation, a really strong relationship with all of these local governments. So these guys take some comfort in that. They know if we're involved in the deal that number one, it's going to be a good development. It's going to be well designed, well built, well operated. We've got good partners in the deal. So that helps with kind of buy-in that, okay, we're happy with this deal. But we have seen this kind of, I hate to use the term standardization, but kind of a range of money splits and stuff on developer fee, cash flow. This worked for us, and it's apparently worked well enough because developers keep coming back and wanting to do more deals with us, so that lets me know they're making enough money to make the deal make sense. So, I don't want to sit there and throw numbers out because somebody may have a little different idea, but the deals make sense. Now, we are very actively involved in design. We're the general contractor, which yields a sales tax exemption. We enter into a master subcontract with ABC Construction or whatever, but we're additional named insured. I've got my steel-toed boots and my hard hat on. I'm on the job site, and I'm signing draws and change orders and all. So, but everybody's okay with that. And the idea there is not to slow the deal down and make it more complicated, but to be a true partner of the deal. And I think it is important to say that when you start putting one of these together and you go look at that limited partnership agreement, that LPA, there are certain things that managing general partner has to do to meet the test of being a legitimate general partner. And not only are the investors looking at that, I think TDHCA is looking at that. Is that nonprofit really involved in that deal? I mean, I'm signing releases for reserve funds to turn units, developing the annual budget for the properties. That shows that we are actively involved in that transaction. And I want to keep in mind, we did this, I just hired my third employee, just hired general counsel, but we've done all these deals over the years with me and my assistant. So we figured out how to do this by putting the right systems in place. Well, I don't have to go become a big government bureaucracy. We're anything but. So. And
it's the second time Jim has mentioned this, so as a for-profit developer, I've got to jump on it the second time because I guess I was too much of my policy hat on the first time he said it. But it is important that your development partner make money. Like Jim said, when we're negotiating with the upper tier investor, the strength of your development partner is going to dictate the terms that the deal gets. Everything from pricing to how involved the limited partner is going to be in oversight. Developers have overhead. The longer it takes for us to close a deal, the more that eats into our overhead and that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, we need a balance sheet to provide the guarantees. When the deal's not cash flowing, generally we're the ones providing those guarantees. We're the ones that have to financially stand behind the deal. If you're coming into this having never done one of these partnerships, talk to your other partners. I've found that generally housing authorities and housing finance corps, it's a very collegial type of atmosphere. I'm always encouraged when I'm talking to a new partner and they tell me that they've been talking to some other of their peers that have gone through the process before, because they're making a more informed decision. They're a little more educated in what goes into making these deals work. I don't want to tell you how much money your development partner should or shouldn't be making. It's a business decision between folks, but it's not 10 years ago or 15 years ago when your development partner was giving you a small percentage of the fee, 90-10. I don't think a lot of folks are doing that. The counter to that too is what is the partner doing to show their active participation? Another place we see that a lot is say HUD approvals is one way where we usually have some kind of development agreement with our partners. Instrumentality where they're agreeing to provide certain services for that share of the fee that they're getting. But anyways, that's kind of piggybacking on his point.
Well, I mean, you've got anytime a developer goes to close a deal, they have to meet certain liquidity requirements, and they're just like us. Remember I said my first mission is to not manage my company into bankruptcy. Well, you've got the same issue. So you have to understand what the needs of the various parties are to get the deal at the closing table. And it's probably also important to note, like in our case, when we do these deals, these bond 4% transactions, we're the bond issuer as well as the general partner and the landowner and the co-developer and general contractor and all of that. So that brings in another whole level of complexity to these deals potentially, and certain things we have to look at. But it's very important that you understand what your partner needs to get out of the deal to make it work. Because remember, when you close a deal, and in Texas, the reason I mentioned bond deals, the Attorney General of the state of Texas will not let us do escrow closings. So when we go do a bond deal, and we get that bond allocation or docket number from the State Bond Review Board, that starts a 150-day clock. We have to go soup to nuts on that whole deal, not only on the financing side, but on the real estate side. So while we're doing that, these guys are over here writing checks to civil engineers and architects, et cetera, third-party reports. All that has to be done, and the city has to be willing to issue a permit-ready letter that says, but for the payment of fees, we're ready to issue building permits. If you don't do that, then the AG is probably not going to let you close that deal. So the point of that is, these guys are more than $200 or $300 into one of these deals when you get the closing table. You're probably $500,000 in cash into the deal. So again, you need to understand how that works on the front end. The worst thing that could happen to one of these bond deals is blow up at the table or 2 or 3 or 5 days before closing, because everybody's out a lot of money.
If I'm only out
I feel your pain.
Yeah. If I'm only out $500,000 in cash, I'm doing pretty good by that closing. For me, $700,000 is probably what we'll need to get to closing, and that's cash out the door. That doesn't include liabilities with, we have long-standing relationships with our attorneys. We don't always pay them until the closing. So it's not even just the cash out, but it's all those contracts that I've signed that I've yet to pay that I would be liable for if the deal blows up. And that's a very good point.
From the housing authority side, I think something that we've done now as an incentive to help the developers is we've pre-funded a percentage of those costs as part of our responsibility to show, number one, we're in the deal with you. Number two, we expect to be involved now in decision making as little decision making things as what paint colors are we going to put. Ask my development coordinator there, Suzanne, who's picking out paint colors.
Part of the job.
Yeah, exactly. You notice that's why I'm not doing it.
I think those are big decisions,
well, I know
not
they
little
are.
ones.
Brown.
Go for it. I usually, But
I'm all about the color.
But as a standardization, I think it's a good gesture by the housing authority to put and help take a little bit of that pain up front. I mean, you hope you've vetted the property and the project enough to know that the deal's going to work. Keeping fingers crossed in that. So the housing authority does, at least in our stance, and I know a lot do, that we do put some money at risk up to a certain amount to help offset some of those pre-development costs.
And that's where, for a private developer, I mean, that's one of the things that makes these partnerships attractive. This is if our partner can provide some of that pre-development money, sometimes we're still guaranteeing it, but it really facilitates it. So for a lot of developers, I mean, that's part of the appeal of doing these partnerships is, especially on a housing authority type of transaction, generally the land's not going away, the housing authority owns it. So if you don't luck out the first year, you can come back next year, and then if there's some kind of sharing of those pre-development expenses, for a lot of developers, that means potentially 1 or 2 more deals per year that you can do with your same capacity.
Yeah, I think we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but it kind of goes to back of that very first question is, I think Joy, everybody asked what a housing authority looks in a developer, and we kind of indicated what does a developer look for in a housing authority. Having a housing authority partner that has the ability to do those types of things. We had a transaction that we're closing in, probably will close in November, December, on a development where there was a competing entity trying to take down the land. And typically, a landowner will sit there and let you do your deal and let it get done. We were forced to have to make a decision, and we were able, as a housing authority, to front the land cost and pay it down. And so now the housing authority has an asset of this land, and then we'll get our money back when we close our deal, when we get our development deal closed. So I mean, I think looking at housing authorities that can do those types of things and have not only just the wherewithal to do it and the strength to do it, but the leadership behind to approve those types of things, like we mentioned, our board and things that, I mean, that's a risk. You talk about a risk reward. We look at the long term of this development. We think it's going to be a very successful one, and it's going to be something that's really the city's wanting us to do. So the reward is at the end game, but the risk is, we dump down a lot of money to take the land down in order to secure that deal. So, knowing your housing authority and what they can do and have the ability to do those types of things, or are they willing to do it? And we're not going to do it all the time. I mean, but there are certain circumstances where we do some interesting creative things.
And so a pitfall could be that if the deal blows up, you have some land on your hands, but hopefully someone would be just as interested in buying it as you were.
Correct.
Yeah, I think Ron makes an important point, and we've done that. You remember I said my first mission was to not manage the company into bankruptcy. There's a reason for that.
You've said that 3 or 4 times. This is really emblazoned for you. Emblazoned.
Don't confuse nonprofit with not-for-profit.
Yeah.
But we've done it. We've taken down land a couple of occasions. We've made loans to projects. Yes, my point is, and I think it's Ron's point, to do that, we've got to have enough money to go do that. That makes us a better and a more viable partner, probably with developers, because we have the capacity to go do that. And we've done that in a few occasions where the deal would not have gotten done without that. We helped get it to the table, and that's what we're supposed to do. But you have to be able to evaluate that, because I will tell you that land is a pretty illiquid asset. If you get stuck with it, you may sell it next year, you may sell it 10 years from now. I learned when I was a young developer, the intrinsic value of a piece of dirt is about the market value of the number of cattle you can run on it per acre. That's kind of its intrinsic value. So, and that's not $10 or $12 a square foot.
So I think a little bit earlier, the subject of some of the organizations at the table having boards came up, and the need for board resolutions and board approvals. And Edwina, I'm wondering, could you help us out just a little bit, because there you are, a board member sitting out here. How do you as a board member, how involved is the board in risk evaluation? What do you look at? Help the group understand. If I had a board member here, I'd put them on the spot. How does a board member look at their fiduciary responsibility when it comes to partnerships?
I think one of the most important things is having trust and faith in the staff of the housing authority. I know in our case at the Austin Housing Authority that there are transactions that we as a board never see because staff has taken a look at it and said this is either someone we don't want to partner with, or this is a transaction that the numbers don't make any sense for us. And I think as we know that we don't see everything that comes to the housing authority, then it certainly gives us confidence in the staff that we have, that they are going to bring proposals to us that are well thought out, vetted, and most likely are going to be approved. Our commissioners, we have 5 commissioners, and the staff is really good about talking to the commissioners before. If we've got a particular transaction that's coming up, so that they get a feel, staff gets a feel of what the commissioners are thinking about in those transactions. And as I think about our partnerships, one of the things that we did, Jim, and maybe we should have just borrowed from you, but about 2.5 years ago, we put together basically some parameters or some guidelines on what we wanted when a developer would come to us. Because we have a number of for-profit developers that come to the housing authority and say, well, we want to do business with you. And then another developer says, well, how come you're doing business with them and you're not doing business with them? So we put together a document of a few pages, 3 or 4 pages, that basically says, come one, come all. And this is what we look for in a development partner. And I'll go back, this is one of these soft skills, but I think is so important. You need to like who you're doing business with. So when they come to you and you don't think you like them for whatever reason, it's not going to get any better when you have issues. When you get a week before closing and you've got some kind of problem that you've got to work out. And I have heard Mr. Kowal say from time to time, I really like those guys. I really like those guys. So I think the likability factor is one of those things to consider as we look at how we choose our partners. And I think that's true not only for development partners, but my gosh, anytime you do a syndication, if you're doing a credit deal or a credit and bond deal, and you've got a syndicator that you just, don't like the way they're doing business or don't like them or whatever, because there will be issues. As Jim says, this is real estate. And so there are absolutely going to be issues that you've got to work through. And it helps if you like it.
And it's easy when everything's going perfectly.
I think my
Will it all?
I think my mom told my wife before we got married that anything that I'm doing wrong now is not going to get better once we get married. I think you'd apply the same principle here, which is whatever idiosyncrasies you're seeing in those partners early on, whatever issues haven't been addressed early on, they're only the first bump you hit in the road in the closing process is only going to bring those things out more. So it's those idiosyncrasies only get worse as you get down that road. But you mentioned an interesting point around the board as well, and I think one of the unspoken things, especially as an investor who look at this, is it's easy. A lot of times the development staff on the ground will start working with the whether it's the Housing Finance Corporation or the Housing Authority or just another nonprofit or community-based organization, and have great ideas, meet at a conference and say, hey, we should work together on this, or this and that, and they start drawing up the plans, running numbers, and hit a brick wall by the time it comes back, and you've got to go through two different, very differently oriented, boards or whether it's the owner of the development company who needs to have final sign off on something. And one of the first questions we'll usually ask in that is, has this resolution, this plan been reviewed by the board? Is this risk profile been reviewed? Because you can go spend a lot of time up into that, but going through two different approval processes can be a pretty complicated thing, and that's where those MOUs really come in handy, because those need to be approved at those levels.
So please stand up and tell us who you are. And
my name is Terry Attaway. I am board chair at Fort Worth Housing Solutions, our new name. And so, been on the board a really long time. I just wanted to ditto what she said. We are lucky, though. We have a developer on our board, and we have a commercial banker on our board, and myself who is a residential real estate broker. But as we put things together, I just want to tell you something I'm really, really proud of, is that we were able to work with our city council. And how about at this point, we had a resolution done through the city that every developer that comes and wants to do affordable housing has to talk to us. That's pretty amazing. So I was going to encourage you, as you work with your stakeholders and your municipal people, yes, we've had a great success story. In my opinion, we do better than they do. So that would make sense to them. But we have great partners. Cote Rose is here. Many people. I've been on the board 18 years, though, and I've seen a whole lot. When I came, I didn't know anything about what I'm doing now, but I feel more comfortable now because I do understand budgets, and I understand how to read the numbers. And then we have a great business development department and great ED that we've developed a model in which they already know what the board is going to want to see, like, being a park developer. We have certain things that we will do. If you don't come to us with what we want, then you don't get to work with us. So, we've got it like that now. When I started, we owned 3 assets. We're closing on about number 30 right now. So we've done a great job, and I just want to encourage you that these things can be done as you, develop your track record and show your success.
Thank you. And you mentioned Barry, and Barry Palmer with Coates Rose is here. And Barry, you look at these deals all across the state. What is the #1 pitfall in these partnerships that we should look out for?
Barry, be careful now. Don't let her have any of our...
Feel free to expand that to 3 if you can't zero in on just 1.
I remind you, this is being recorded. No?
I think the #1 pitfall is if the developer and the housing authority or housing finance corporation or nonprofit, if they don't really understand each other's expectations. Oftentimes, some developers will assume that the housing authority or a nonprofit, want to be in the deal to earn some part of the fee, but maybe not have that big a role. They don't want to do as much work. Whereas the housing authority, for example, may want to be sure that they have a say who the tax credit investor is. And so there are times where I think developers will go too far down the road in a new partnership, not realizing the things that they're going to need to get buy-off from their partner, whether it be a housing authority or a nonprofit.
But, if I could kind of follow up on what Edwina just said, and I'm glad you said that, because there's kind of the art and the science of this. I mean, we all look at the numbers, and you have to decide, is this a business deal that makes sense or not? But Edwina really touched on the human side of it, which is, do I like these guys? Like Ron says, do I trust them? if we're dating now, we're about to go into a partnership, it's a very, very long-term deal, and things may not always be perfectly rosy. So are these folks that we can sit down and work through issues together as real partners to try to achieve the same goal, which is keep the deal from going toes up, as the old saying goes. Make sure it's a good deal that everybody can live with. You make the money, we make the money, the investors are happy, because we're all worried about relationships. You know, if a deal blows up, when we structure our deals, you're Joy talking about all of our subsidiary companies, we structure our deals that way for the exact same reason the developer does. And that's to try to limit liability and try to manage that potential liability. But there's always reputational risk, you know, and that's why I tell people I've never regretted the deals I haven't done. And just like when I said, I don't take every deal to my board. You know, I take the deals to my board. Mark Mayfield, one of my board members, but I try to take the deals to the board that I'm comfortable with, deals that I feel like we can do, deals that I would do myself personally. So if it doesn't meet that test, I always tell people, for us, it's not about doing the most deals. It's about doing the right deal in the right place with the right people for the right reason. And that's work through both sides, the art and the science, and figure out if you've got a deal that you think you can be proud of. I don't ever want to drive down the road and look at a deal that I have to say, hey, look over here, you know, so you don't see that. Because I tell the communities, I'll tell you what we will do. Equally important, I'll tell you what we will not do. I'm not going to come build a project in your community that we're not all very proud of, that we can live with long term.
And, you know, a couple of things there, and Edwina mentioned this, you know, she and the rest of her board trust their staff. And you know, you work with enough housing authorities, you see all sides of that coin, and there's really no right or wrong way to do it. It's just whatever works, and can you work with what you've got? I've worked with boards where the executive director is there to put everything through the board. I've worked with boards where, and on those kinds of situations, board members are coming to our development meetings, and they're there with the staff reviewing plans with us when we get that 30% architectural plan, and the board sometimes is very, very involved. I've worked multiple closings with a housing authority having never met their board, not even going to a board meeting, because the staff has such a good relationship with their board, and the staff is empowered, and they don't need the developer there. The board doesn't need to be there with the developer. There's really no right or wrong way to do that. But as you know, as a developer, you do need to understand what that dynamic is, because you know. You can't come in expecting it's going to be like that last partner that you had, however they ran it. And to the point about the relationships, I don't care how much expertise you bring to the table, you're not going to be able to anticipate what's going to go wrong. So at some point, you know, so you can't plan for everything in your agreements. And every once in a while, you'll come into a situation where you're sitting there with your partner, both scratching your heads, how in the world did we get here? And having that relationship, trusting your partner. I mean, I've seen a lot of people do a lot of things that they were never supposed to do per the agreement, but it was a function of salvaging the relationship, whether that was with the investor, with the lender, with the nonprofit partner, with the developer. So it is important. You know, you don't want to make all of your decisions worried about the worst case scenario, but to the point, you at some point take a step back and ask yourself, if the whole thing implodes, do I want to be sitting in a table with that team, with that person, trying to fix it and trying to find a solution?
Yes, please.
I'm Patrick Sheridan with Volunteers of America, and we partner with housing authorities and other nonprofits and for-profits. And I think what was said it definitely makes a lot of sense about what I call mission alignment, because you don't necessarily get the same mission alignment between for-profits and nonprofits or housing authorities and such. And while we do partnership with other nonprofits and housing authorities, we've sort of decided internally that we don't necessarily want to partner with a for-profit, but we'd be more than happy to do turnkey deals with them. And it really is almost the same thing, with the exception that because we're long-term home owners, then we're not necessarily on the same time frames as what the in any of those cases, I think what was said is definitely true. You've got to have the roles and responsibilities totally lined out. One of the things we do is a separate sheet with 3 columns in it, one for the nonprofit, one for our partner, and one for a consultant, which many times are in there, to spell out what each one of them is going to do, whether they've got the primary role or the secondary role. And the earlier you do that as a process, the better, because certainly we've had some situations where it wasn't well worked out. We got past the tax credit awards, and then everybody's trying to decide, well, who's picking the syndicator or the contractor, that type of thing. But document it as early as possible, even though it may be a little awkward in the partnership at that point, but we'll save you a lot of grief later on.
So I think we've reached the point where I say to you, what didn't we talk about that you'd like to hear about? Is there a question we didn't answer? Great. Well,
I want to add one
yeah.
thing, Joy, if you don't mind, real quickly.
Sure.
From the housing authority side, I think I mentioned it earlier, is that housing authorities are starting to educate themselves a lot more. I mean, it's awesome to hear Fort Worth. They're just fantastic in where they've done. El Paso's done some great things. You know, we consider us doing a lot of out of the box deals, but the process or the new program called RAD, the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program that HUD has implemented for housing authorities, has really opened up a tremendous opportunity for developers to venture into partnerships with housing authorities. And while some of us up here, you know, we kind of know what we're doing, and you know, we embrace this process. There's housing authorities now, especially across the state of Texas, that are seeing bigger housing authorities and other housing authorities doing these RAD deals, and are now asking those same questions. How do I get involved in RAD? And they're reaching out to other housing authorities to help them and give them recommendations and give them references. And so reputation and partnerships that we have, that we work with developers that we're proud to say, call so-and-so or do this, is one thing. But I think it's an opportunity that developers truly have a chance and an opportunity to really help, you know, a housing authority do some really cool things. I think RAD is a direction that housing authorities are across the country are looking. HUD is continually trying to push to open the cap, to make it completely open, so there's not a limit on the amount of units that can convert. And honestly, when you think about RAD and it's the conversion of your public housing subsidy to a form of a voucher, it's equal to about, I'm just going to guess, at least in Austin, it's about 50% of what a fair market voucher would be. So unless you're doing development and adding more density and adding more units, it's very difficult to just transfer, do a conversion, because there's renovation has to be done. There's reserves that have to be put up, and all that now it turns into a private model. So housing authorities now are looking at development opportunities, and I think it's a huge opportunity for developers to reach out to housing authorities, and housing authorities are reaching out to a lot of advocates in this industry that to help them figure out how to get to this program, because I think it's the way that I really feel in the long run this is the way, the new model of public housing, and you've seen some great examples in Texas, from El Paso to Fort Worth. I mean, they've done so many RAD conversions. You know, we've followed their model. We called them all the time, and we're doing our whole portfolio. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's an awesome opportunity for developers to get involved. They have the equal shot because most housing authorities do RFPs, so everyone's got a shot at coming in and doing a presentation to get the housing authority's business. And so just keep that in mind, because I know you've heard a lot about RAD this week, probably yesterday in the conference, and I know there's some more sessions on RAD, and it is a big topic among housing authorities, and it's a great opportunity. Just wanted to share that.
We're doing quite a few of them, and good opportunity to do bond transactions. But I wholeheartedly agree. Everything we hear from HUD is this is the future. So I am hopeful that the cap will get lifted soon. to really allow those transactions to start moving forward. It's a good model.
We had a great, we toured Tom Davis, who's the head of recap at HUD, today for 2 hours of our inventory of RAD conversions in a car this morning from 9 to 11:30, and it was a great opportunity to listen to him talk one-on-one and really stress that, you know, hey guys, I think this deal's going to stick. I know we're in an election year, and I know we have changes in administrations and Congress, but he really thinks that both sides of the aisle have really embraced the RAD program, and I think it's something that's going to be here to stay. So,
Joy, if I could add one thing, we talked about the partnership living with it. You know, we've all talked about the fact that you go get the deal closed. You have to remember there are a lot of people involved at the closing. I have an intern in my office now. I just gave him the distribution list for a deal we're getting ready to close. It's 5 pages. And you know, it takes a lot of people to close it, but most of those folks, you get it closed, they're off to the next deal. We have to live with it. And with that in mind, I would encourage you, after you close one of these deals, and we do this routinely, and some of our developer partners have said, we're really about the only nonprofit group that does this. We go back in 2, 3, 4, 5 years into the deal. We're always looking at those partnership documents. You know, everybody says the worst thing you do when you close a bond deal is ever go back and look at it. But we do on the partnership stuff because, among other things, go back and look at the cash flow waterfall in that LPA, and it's as helpful for the developers as it is for us to go back and dust that deal off and say, okay, guys, what bucket are we in now? We're in bucket 5 in the waterfall. Have we paid off everything we're supposed to? You know, what about incentive management fees? Things that are going to be accrued perhaps, you know, when there's not sufficient cash flow. But you need to keep that in mind, that as that deal matures, there are going to be other sources of revenue and fees and stuff perhaps paid out of that deal that it's awful easy to forget about when you're 5 or 6 years into the deal. So we always sit down with our developer partners, and everybody finds that extremely helpful to go out and dust all that off and go, okay, yeah, we did that right. Whoops. We better be thinking about this because we're about to come up on that point and go to bucket 7 in the waterfall or something. And what does that mean? So that's just part of the ongoing management of the deal and knowing what you close. Even though the documents stand this tall, you've got to, mine are all dog-eared, they've got Post-it notes stuck all over them, but that's just something that is part of the deal. It's part of living with it and being a partner for a long period of time.
I think that's as good a tip as I've heard here today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it figures. It has to be.
So thank you very much for being here. We appreciated it, and I appreciate the panel.